Hello, everybody. We'll get started if everybody is ready. So thanks for joining this afternoon to talk about Hadoop in a public safety, public security context. I'm Gary Shiffman, and first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. I have learned so much in the last 48 hours about how Hadoop is being enabled by the innovation and the energy of the people in this room, and it's inspiring and it's great to see, and I'm very grateful. I want to talk a little bit about that today, about how we get Hadoop and the cloud up to the analysts and the operators and the users. So how do we connect from the cloud and Hadoop up to the mission? My background is, I put a little bit of the highlights up here, but run a company called Giant Oak. We do custom analytics in the public safety, public security space, solve complex problems. So I'm not a database engineer, but I like to rely on database engineers and software engineers to get our work done. And for the past couple decades or so, I've been working in national security and law enforcement. I was at U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Department of Homeland Security, in the Senate, in the Pentagon. So that's my background, and that's the perspective that I'll be speaking from today. The message today is that crime, insurgency, terrorism, these are phenomena related to human behavior. And we actually know a lot about human behavior. And in a large data environment, we have opportunities today that we didn't have just a couple years ago. We have opportunities for revolutionary advances in understanding human behavior and influencing human behavior. And Hadoop can be a part of that, and we see it. Those of us who are practitioners in the field are aware of this other world that's just on the horizon to us. That's why I'm here, and that's why we're talking about Hadoop and big data in the national security, public safety, public security domain. But the challenge is that we've got to bridge that gap. Sean Connolly from Hortonworks talked at the plenary yesterday morning about crossing the chasm. So that way the big data analytics capability can reach to the analysts, and I would expand that to the analysts and to the operators, to the people who are actually on the front lines. And that's where I want to, at least for the next 45 minutes that we're together, get you to focus on the operators and understand the world from the perspective of the operators. And hopefully inspire you to continue to do what you're doing and bring that capability to us. So I was in the Gulf War in the Navy a number of years ago. And the way in which we went to war back then, which wasn't that long ago, was the United States sort of Tomahawk long-range missiles took out the air defense system, and then the air forces came in and established air superiority, and then the ground troops rolled in. Now, the way in which we identified the enemies or the bad guys was simple. Take a look at the picture on the left. Can you identify the bad guy, right? They're in the uniforms. They're often driving tanks. Right, that's the environment of conflict or warfare. Now look at the picture on the right. Okay, that might be an example of an environment where U.S. and coalition forces are deployed today. Can you find the bad guy? If I told you there was one in that picture, would you be able to identify him or her? Right. So we're in a context today where we're fighting war among the people. Right? As opposed to on the left where we have satellites overhead and they say, okay, there's You know, the Soviet tanks are arrayed along the Fulda Gap, and we know where the Soviets are. Nowadays, we're in environments where there are a lot of people, and some of those people within that environment might pose a threat. And how do we identify them? How do we find them? In order to do that, we need models and we need data, right? Because that's how we're going to find them. That satellite overhead taking a picture of a crowded marketplace isn't going to do the same thing for us, okay? So this is a paradigm shift that I want to paint that picture for you. Warfare today is personal, and we need to be able to observe, describe, and predict and understand the human terrain. So it sounds like a daunting task. It sounds very difficult, and it is very difficult. But if you look at the photographs of the folks here, whether that's Whitey Bulger, I just added him. He's in the news lately. See, people are more predictable than we want to believe. We talk about free will and human choice, and we cherish it and we pride ourselves on it. And we're all going to get up tomorrow morning and behave largely the way we behaved this morning. So we tend to be much more predictable than we want to think. So we have a science of human behavior, right? I'm an economist. I'm a social scientist. And what I've been doing for most of my career is building models of human behavior, specifically as it relates to illicit activity. So models of human behavior, specifically humans doing things that maybe we don't want them to do. Could be money laundering or smuggling or terrorism or warfare of some sort. So we have a science of human behavior. Conflict and violence are phenomena related to human behavior. So we can model this. So everybody that you're looking at in this picture has that something in common, and that's the basis for social science or behavioral science. Every human, no matter race, religion, culture, language, or point in history, has some common trait, and that's the basis of social science. That common trait, by the way, is, as Adam Smith phrased it about 235 years ago or so, was the propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. So we just assume that people have a propensity to truck, barter, and exchange, regardless of where you live in the world and in what year you live in the world. People have relationships. People rely on each other, and we can count on these things. To quote Smith, to go back to your high school economics classes, hopefully this is not a bad memory for most of you, although I imagine it is. It's not from benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. People are rational, self-maximizing individuals, and we need each other, right? If we all had to grow our own food and cook our own food, we wouldn't be at the Hadoop summit today. So that's the division of labor, right? We can count on this. We can model this. So I know something about all of you. You know something about me. And we have social networks. We rely on each other. We rely on people. These are things we can discover in data. So we apply these models of human behavior to Mohammed Atta, to MS-13, to members of the FARC. And based upon these models and these assumptions, we can go into data environments and try to discover things. So this big data revolution that we're in the middle of gives us those opportunities for observing human behavior. So what do I mean by that? So as a scientist, say you're a physicist, you set up controlled experiments. You drop an object and you measure the reaction of your dropping the object, and you do it over and over again in controlled environments, or you control for things to the best that you can, and then you can start to make predictions, right? So if I drop this pen, I'm pretty confident that it will hit the table, right? So can I do the same thing in human nature, in human science? Can I move, just to go back to a real life example, can I go from post 9/11, immediately after 9/11, we put rules in place to screen, men age 18 to 34 from Saudi Arabia. It's like, that's very inefficient, not highly accurate, but on September 12th, that was the kind of thing we did. Can we build models of a Muhammad Atta as opposed to sort of these broad categories of people? It's the same types of things that you all might be thinking about and dealing with in a commercial realm, where you want to micro-target the ads that you send to people on behalf of a commercial company, right? You want to go from broad demographics of males 18 to 34 who live in the suburbs of a big city to micro-targeting, right? Same idea. Can we build those same kinds of models? And where we would go is, so what's causing the riots taking place on Taksim Square right now? Right? That's something that largely was unpredicted, unanticipated. And how do we expect Prime Minister Erdogan to respond? Right? So if we actually wanted to do this as scientists, how would we do it? You can see how I could pose this as a scientific question, an action or reaction, right? What's the reaction given a certain action? And how data is the key to allowing us to do this. The obvious problem here is in physics or in chemistry, I may get my error bars pretty small. Humans, we're never going to get perfect, right? There's always that, I drink Coca-Cola products all of the time, and you know that because you observed me, and today I just decided I wanted a Pepsi, right? So humans are just a little bit unpredictable, but we can get pretty good. We can get pretty close. So data is really the key to us doing this, is observing people, because humans, we don't live in sterile environments in a lab where we can control everything. So we need to see life as it happens, see the world as it passes by, and look for observations where we can come close to replicating that laboratory environment, that scientific experiment. So the combat and war in Afghanistan in the last 10 years generated tremendous amounts of data. And social scientists will be studying that for years to come, right? We look for these opportunities to, when the world is happening anyways, to capture the data. So the data is messy. The data comes from disparate sources. The data is extremely large. Sounds like a problem that a lot of people at this conference are spending a lot of time thinking about. How do we run analytics in those kinds of environments? And where does Hadoop fit in? Bringing the cloud to the analyst is the task we have. The data are there, and actually we're capturing a lot of the data. We need to get to the analytics. We're not really there yet. We're getting there, and I think, again, we see over the horizon where we're going to be. We're very excited about that, but we need to get there. There's this idea of methodological dualism, that we've got the physical world of physics and chemistry where we observe things and we can describe and explain them. What we're talking about now is looking at the world of human behavior and human action and saying, can we apply the same methodology, right? Can we have a unified methodology, a scientific method, and apply it in a human sphere? And the idea is, with big data, we're getting closer to that. Emphasis on closer. Okay, so in the United States government, we have all these fantastic institutions that are very good at what they do in the national security, homeland security, public safety and security domain, right? We have the Department of Homeland Security, created in March of 2003 as a direct response to the September 11th attacks. We have U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which is the frontline border agency of the United States government on the borders at and between the ports of entry. We have Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and now HSI, to do the investigations of customs and immigration laws. We have the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, which is not in the Department of Homeland Security, it's in the Department of Justice. And their primary mission is to investigate crimes related to drugs and drug trafficking. ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, they deal in alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. So we've got the Treasury Department dealing in financial crimes, financial regulations. We've got the Department of Defense. But here's the problem. The problem is that as good as each of these institutions is independently, we have problems sharing information collectively. This is a massive problem. This is a massive opportunity for you all, for this group. The problems come from the difference of the missions, but also laws, right? The intelligence community is in the newspaper recently for the PRISM program, the Snowden leaks. You know, the United States intelligence community is not allowed by law to look at data related to U.S. persons. That's the law of the land in the United States. So how does the CIA and how do the CIA and FBI share information with each other? They're looking for terrorists, but if the data they're looking at implicates U.S. persons, then the CIA can't see it, and only the FBI can, but they're looking for maybe the same folks. One of the lessons learned of written about in the 9/11 report was this, the wall between intelligence and law enforcement and how it hindered the ability to possibly discover the 9/11 attacks before they happen. So we've done a lot over the last decade to overcome those things, but we still have these barriers to sharing. And significantly, and a really big point that I want you all to understand is that the cultures and the institutions are designed not to share information as well. So we have law enforcement officers that get evaluated on the number of cases that they break, right? So if you chose to enter federal law enforcement or state and local law enforcement, and the federal government comes in and wants to take over your case, you're not happy about that. Right? So because I'm trying to solve cases, I'm trying to arrest people. So we have all of these barriers to sharing information. So wouldn't it be cool if we could ingest all of the information, create data lakes, and share the information only based upon strict rules of governance in terms of who can see what data fields, who has what authorities and who has what rights. Complex, challenging problem, but something that we're actually talking about for the last 48 hours here in terms of, you know, what Hadoop allows you to do. So we have this opportunity with Hadoop and maybe a Cumulo type capabilities on top of that, and you all probably know other alternatives to an Accumulo on top of a Hadoop that allow for the privacy, security, civil liberties, and incentives of local law enforcement agencies, federal law enforcement agencies, and across that federal community. So that's the federal landscape. We have tremendous data. We have serious obstacles to sharing data. And the key to realizing those revolutionary advances is going to come from sharing that data, from understanding human behavior and getting all those additional observations. So this is my summary of where we are. So if you walk around federal office places and you talk about Hadoop, they don't know what it is. There are pockets across all of the federal agencies where there are probably a half a dozen folks who are doing a Hadoop pilot somewhere. but it's a pocket and it's a small group of folks, and they're really excited about it and they love it, and they probably know somebody that attended the Hadoop Summit today, and that's why they're even doing it. But they're small pockets, and that's where we are today. Big data can lead to big errors. We're making, to the extent that we do have clouds and we have aggregated data environments and federated data environments in this domain, and I imagine in many other domains, we're making big errors. What do I mean by that? So all of us, again, back in school, we learned about the law of large numbers. Law of large numbers says that as your number of observations goes up, the error of your sample relative to the population will go to 0. Well, today that's not true, I would argue. You can go from 10 million to 100 million observations, but if all of those observations are from the tail, then you're really not driving the error to 0, right? The mean of the sample is not necessarily the mean of the population. And that phrase that I just said, there are a lot of people doing analytics in various places that don't know what that means, what I just said. So that's why big data is leading to big errors. There are bias based upon the ways in which we collect data. The data generation processes are important and they matter. So we have large N's and we still have tremendously biased data because of our sampling methods, because of our data generation methodologies. We can correct for these things, but there needs to be a realization that there's a flaw in the law of large numbers here. My third observation of where we are in this space, at least in my domain, is that the cloud, having a cloud doesn't mean you're doing cloud analytics. I see a lot of examples of, again, cloud initiatives taking place, and then to do the analytic, we pull a cube out of the cloud and we run our analytics on a much smaller scale. Another challenge for this group. Let's get to the place where the analyst can interact directly with the cloud and run analytics at scale. As I've walked around and met, I think, almost every vendor in the other room over the last 2 days, that's always the question I ask, is how close are we to getting that analyst and the cloud together where they can talk directly without being SQL or Java or running batch queries. Share and control data, the point I was making on the previous slide when I showed you that federal landscape, it seems like a contradiction. I want to share my data with my colleagues engaged in the same mission space, but I want to control my data. I may be required to control my data because of laws and regulations, but I also want to control my data because I want to close the case, or data is power, and institutionally I'm much better off controlling my data. So we need to solve that. How do we do that? And again, maybe a cumulo is the right answer, maybe not. But those are the kinds of things we need to think about, is how do we create the big data lake, allow lots of people to participate in the big data lake, and yet not get access to everything once you're in the data lake, right? And my last is there's no easy button yet. I think there's an acknowledgement in the plenary speeches even of the last 2 days that we're not yet at the point where you can deploy Hadoop and not have like the software engineer on the team. You need that software engineer who's not the analyst, who's not the operator, but it's the software engineer. So we're not there yet. So we have all of these expectations, but we need to fill that technology gap. But ultimately, Hadoop, I believe, is inevitable. Why do I think it's inevitable? I mean, I'm here because I believe Hadoop is inevitable and it's going to happen. I think there's enough of an acknowledgement that the benefits of scale from Hadoop are significant. The ability to take in your data and let your data be your data and not make it fit some highly structured form or vessel is widely understood. The ability to scale in tough budget environments, so we don't have massive amounts of money. You may have read about in the newspaper, in the federal government, we're cutting federal budgets. And Hadoop is seen as, in big data and clouds, and Hadoop, a part of it, is seen as one of the solutions. So scale, efficiency, in a very cost-effective and cost-efficient way. And I think that's the state of Hadoop in my domain, in that national security and public safety and public security domain. Is there's an acknowledgement, don't know what Hadoop really is, but I'm familiar with it. I think it has something to do with the cloud. And I think it's something that's going to allow me to massively increase my efficiency in a way that I can afford. People want Hadoop even if they don't totally know what it is. So where are we? So violence is about human behavior. It's a human function. And we know a lot about human behavior. And we have a science, and we build models of human behavior. And we're in a big data environment that gives us many more observations than we've ever had before. Each of us leaves a digital trail behind us throughout the day. There are ways in which you are being observed by Verizon and AT&T and by Google and by Target and everybody else. Your actions are being observed. It's revolutionizing so many aspects of our lives. There's no reason why we shouldn't think about how it revolutionizes warfare, combat, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, countering organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, fraud, all of these things that you may not wake up in the morning thinking about, but those folks who do wake up in the morning thinking about it, the big data revolution has to get to them as well. Now we need to balance privacy, civil liberties, and all of those things, but we have to balance them on the marketing side too, on the Target and the Google side as well. Similar types of challenges. But what we need is we need you all to keep doing what you're doing. I'm a believer now. I'll be at Hadoop summits in the future to be a part of this dialogue and to be a part of this initiative. I think, if we went from a couple hundred to 2,700 this year, I think next year should be 27,000 here. This is an exciting time. It's an exciting opportunity. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And thank you for letting me be a part of it, and look forward to any questions you may have. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah? No? Okay. All right, so being the last speaker, there you go.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Can you speak to any of the experiments that you alluded to in the very beginning, experiments where you would inject into the society something and observe the results that you can speak about?
Yeah, so first and foremost, you look for naturally occurring experiments. So you look for, you try to measure what we call normal patterns of life, and then there was some sort of an intervention, and you look for changes. And oftentimes we don't get to, as the social scientists, we don't call for the intervention, but we try to get all of the data together so we can see the before and after, which is good. I don't want to be, ordering the drone strikes, right? So, but there are ways in which you can do experiments. I believe that one of the things that we really need to get to in this domain is thinking about experiments, right? So counterinsurgency, imagine most of you haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about counterinsurgency, but in that opening slide where I showed the crowded marketplace versus folks in uniforms, counterinsurgency, the way you defeat an insurgency is you win over the hearts and minds. You guys have heard that cliche before. It's a battle for the hearts and minds. You want the local population to support you. So the way in which you get the local population to support you, we believe, is you spend money there. You build schools and roads and bridges and stuff like that. Well, that's an opportunity for an experiment, right? So if we can measure normal patterns of life before the school is built and then measure them again afterwards, maybe we can see, well, what was the impact? The problem is again, it's not a sterile lab, right? There might have been, a rainstorm that happened at the same time that the school was finished. So how do you know if it was the rain or the school that caused a spike or a drop in violence, right? So we have to collect as much data as possible to try to control for as many factors as possible. But thanks for the question, because it allowed me to emphasize the point that it's incredibly important. Because in the normal sciences, if you just observe something and you don't run an experiment, you can only be so sure that you're measuring the impact you thought you measured. And experiments are incredibly important, and we need to do them in this domain as well. Yeah. Any other? Yeah.
I was just curious, aren't you actually watching the wrong guys? Because the part of the world where usually terrorists come from don't leave any data trail behind them. I mean, people in Somalia very seldom have mobile phones, very seldom have computers and stuff like that. So what do you think about that? Is that to take the data from the news, or how do you go about it?
I'm not sure I agree that bad guys don't leave a data trail behind. Think about it. I mean, even look at what Osama bin Laden had to do to try to stay sort of off the net, right? It was very hard, and yet we still found him. We need each other. We cannot really operate alone. And if we need each other, then look, I may be a drug kingpin, and I'm not going to go anywhere near the drugs. I'm not going to go anywhere near the money, but you work for me, and she works for me, and she works for me, and you guys get closer to the stuff. And then the three of you have three people that work for you, and one of you is going to screw up. One of you is going to do something, talk to somebody, say something you shouldn't have said, and then there's data. Yeah, it's really hard, especially today. Like 20 years ago, it might have been easier. Today, it's really hard to stay, to not leave a digital wake behind you. Yeah, good question, thank you.
I was wondering if part of the data you're looking to analyze and capture, are you trying to do sentiment analysis based on Twitter feeds and so forth and other social media?
So sentiment analysis is very popular for a lot of reasons. A lot of people are doing it. One of the reasons it's so popular, though, is because the data is so abundant and freely available. And I think in Twitter analytics, I would caution everybody about that idea of the sample population and the overall population might be very different. Because when you're looking at Twitter data, you're looking at the sentiment of people who are on Twitter and not the people who are not on Twitter. So there's a bias in the data generation process. And you may be able to control for the bias or overcome the bias. Look for something that, so if you're looking at Tahrir Square and you're looking at Twitter data, you want to look for something that's happening in the square that you can measure in Twitter, but you want to look for another data source that's not correlated with Twitter, and to see if they move in the way in which you would predict them to move. So I love Twitter data, but it's one source of data, and you have to be careful. And I think one of the challenges over the next 5 years, I think we're going to have revolutionary advances in the analytics. I think analytics today are descriptive. We're doing mean and variance at scale, which is really cool, but it's mean and variance. I think we're going to get much better at advanced analytics over the next 5 years, and one of those areas I hope is going to be natural language processing. So we get better at sentiment analysis, but we get better at having the machine read the text closer to the way a human would read the text. I think we're very primitive right now at that. I think we've made a lot of progress over the last 5-10 years, but a machine can't really read the way a human can yet. And I think that's an area for hopefully explosive improvement over the next 5 years. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.